This last case of Cynthia Osokogu that was killed here in Lagos, and after that we heard that some of the officers and men were, were given some kind of appraisal for their performance in getting to the root of that particular case. Looking at this particular recommendation here, you also talked about performance appraisal system. Has it been in operation before now?
Well, what you have is that you have the annual performance evaluation report, but we've called it blind evaluation because it's more an exercise in form filling, so that the person who is doing the review may not necessarily know the police officer personally. They may not have seen them. They may just get their file, what is in their file, and on the basis of what is in the file, they will then fill out the APA, as they call it. And we're saying no, that that isn't really a functional review. It's just an exercise in form filling. What you need is that the review should be a dynamic process by which, if people are given tasks to perform, then the person who is reviewing them will see how they perform those tasks. And also we're saying that the person reviewed should also have their own input into what is said about them, so that the discussion between the person reviewed and the reviewer will also allow the person who is being reviewed perhaps to see where they're going wrong and improve, or the person reviewing to see how they have misinterpreted and to correct.
So this takes off the so-called eye service.
Yes, I mean, we've said that when people are, when police officers do something very good, naturally we think that they should be commended. Although we think that we need to get away from the idea that people should just be rewarded for doing the job that they are actually supposed to be doing. But at the same time, we find that things like national honours, which are going to, the big boys, the top dogs, the serving people at the top. But the person who is going out to face the armed robbers at the risk of their life, they're away from the center where the list of those who should be given double promotion, special promotion, given national honors, or given any kind of award. We find that their case is hardly mentioned. So the fact that the people in the case of the Cynthia case have been singled out is perhaps because that case itself had a lot of prominence, and then the police were now able to work and to fish out those who are said to be responsible, because of course we must remember that the trial is yet to go on.
Did you also look at the time with which they respond to any kind of distress?
Yeah, again, we've talked about the fact that there is supposed to be a single, easily memorable emergency number, which the Nigerian Communications Commission ought to have made operational.
That should work nationally.
Yes, it should. The number should work nationally, and it's important that you can have long lists of numbers of police officers, but they're not numbers that you can remember. And of course, if one of the things that's happened to you is that your telephone has been stolen, then that's not going to help you very much. So we need but it's also important that if that number is established and working, it must work full time. It's not something that people will say, oh, well, that one will not work. So that it's not something that you can dip a foot into the water and then see whether you must be fully committed to having that number manned by operators who can respond 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 plus 1 day a year. And what we're saying also, essentially, is that police need to be able to find places, so that maps, not me coming to channels, but police need to be able to know how to get to the places, so that in each different location you'll have people who will then relay the distress call to the appropriate authority. But it needs to take off, and that is what will allow the police to respond quickly to distress calls. Not, of course, forgetting the fact that they need to have vehicles fueled and all these other things, these other logistic things, which seem to be so lacking, again, at the cutting edge. A lot of things are fine and dandy in the headquarters at Abuja, But at the local police post, the local police station, that's where you have these stories of no paper, no fuel, no tires, and all the rest of it.
Looking at the question of training, that looks basic, because even if you had state police, if the training is inadequate, you still have problems. So if at the moment they were to perhaps consolidate on this training to the extent that those who Nigerians meet in the front lines out there are well trained, will we be talking about all these challenges now?
Probably not, but we also have to recognize that it's harder to eradicate a culture which has become ingrained, and we recognize that is a serious issue for the police, the obey before complaining culture and so on. But I think that the training is really the essence of it, because in the first place, the training will weed out those who are not suitable to be police officers. The second thing is that the training should show those who are going to stay different areas where they can specialize. Now, we've recommended that the fact that you specialize should not mean that you become removed from the possibility of promotion and so on. But we do need expertise in different things. I mean, you would have seen a case recently abroad where a child got missing. The witnesses were children. Now, if you don't have people, and it's not just saying let women police officers talk to them because they're children. It's a matter of having people who are specially trained to deal with vulnerable people who might be either victims, they might be suspects, they might be witnesses. It's a kind of training that is required, just even for that, and that's before you get into things that require money and equipment and so on. So that we say that you first of all undergo that generalized training, because you need to actually have some knowledge about everything, even the knowledge to know that this is an area for the specialists. I need to preserve the situation, but I need to back off. But you also then, after you've been an officer for some time, we also recommend, of course, continuous training, not just for the purpose of being promoted to the next level, but continuous training because new things are happening. There are new developments coming up all the time. But we're also saying that once you have been in the force, you should see an area perhaps where you might want to specialize. It could be ballistics, it could be some other kind of forensic activity, so that you become a real expert. Because right now, the Nigeria police is losing most of its experts.
Speaking about at the entry level, while you spoke with people who came up and said they had gone through the rudiments, they couldn't be absorbed eventually, did they talk about their love for the police? Because, I mean, that's got to drive some people
in fact,
to stay.
It was actually the thing that that came out. Some of them were very disappointed, and other members of the public said that the problem with the way that some police are recruited is that there's unemployment generally. Yeah. And so for many people, especially those who come in because they know somebody, it's just a job. And if there was something else that they could do, they would go and do that job. So you find that many people who actually get in don't have the love of policing. Now, what they love could be a different thing. I mean, because the current presentation of the police is not a good one. So it may be that some who love the idea of policing love the idea of being able to boss people around and to use that force. I mean, we had one former police officer when we were saying that when people were raising the issue that the police, the name of the police should be changed to Nigeria Police Service or Nigeria Police. He said, but if you don't have that word force, if you don't have force, it was almost, how will anybody obey me or listen to me? You know, it was a kind of real bewilderment on his face. Of course, we also spoke to the IG, who said that that's not really the issue, because of course at the senior levels they recognize that the importance of policing by consent is what makes for effective policing. But at the lower level, they feel that this is what gives me my swagger. Yeah.
Do you, I'm very tempted to go away from the report and ask you about your experience on the Police Service Commission and whether or not, that had any influence on this report.
Well, it did, to the extent that I mean, of course, when I joined when I was a member of the commission, we were just setting up, even to get records from the police, or was a problem. And the police was very much opposed to the idea that when complaints were made against police officers, the commission should have independent capacity to investigate those complaints. Under the Act, the commission has an investigation department. When the Act was being proposed for amendment as part of the general review of the legislation surrounding the police, one of the recommendations from the Nigeria Police Force was that the investigation department should be abolished from the Police Service Commission. But also, I think that because I was a civil society representative, we were anxious to have members of the public making their communications to the commission, but it was very difficult to move from the idea that people should send in their commissions to actually, even within the commission, that something should be done in response to their communications, whether they were complaints or commendations, and that action should be taken about that. So I think that, again, we had from the public complaint that the commission is really, it has a lot of powers on paper, and it actually is one of the most powerful bodies on paper. But in practice, it has given away all its powers. It doesn't investigate. It just relies on what the police tell them, and then it studies the record of what the police has done, but it doesn't have any independent input itself in most cases.